Joining me now for a little bit of a remembrance, if you will, his take on things is Maryland's senior Democratic Senator Ben Cardin. Senator Cardin, do I say congratulations? I mean, I don't know. What have been, is it condolences or congratulations? Which do you prefer?
Well, Chuck, first of all, thank you very much. I think it's a recognition that I will have served for 58 consecutive years as a legislator. It's time for me to look for other ways to help our community. I'm not going to retire. I'm going to be here very actively for the next 2 years and then look for other ways I can help our community. But it's time for new people to come in, and I think a healthy primary is good. I think it's great that people are interested. You
know, it's interesting. We were doing the numbers. Apparently, Maryland's only had 6 senators in the last 50 years. There's a lot of stability that comes with a Maryland Senate seat. Let me ask you this. A robust primary can come with a lot of positives. What are you most concerned about a big primary doing?
Well, I would hope that it will be positive. It's very important that Maryland maintain its Democratic member of the United States Senate for the balance of power in the United States Senate. So I hope those that are running recognize that the real prize is November, not just the primary election. And I must tell you that the names that have been floated, I think they're all sensitive to that.
You know, when I think about Maryland politics, you know, when I first started covering Maryland politics, the more Baltimore you had in your resume, the better. Over the last 20 years, the more D.C. suburbs sometimes, the better. I'm curious your take and whether Maryland's political identity for you still is more at the Baltimore Harbor, or is it more in Montgomery County?
It's the entire state of Maryland, from the beaches to the shore. I love the state of Maryland. My roots are in Baltimore. It is, when you look at the 4 statewide state officials in Maryland, 2 have roots in Baltimore. And 2 have roots in the Washington area. So I think both the Baltimore and Washington urban centers are rich with population, for particularly Democrats. But I represent the entire state of Maryland.
Let me ask you a few questions that are coming up. I want to specifically talk today about the situation with the Supreme Court and, frankly, where I think the United States Senate, of which you've been a member of for quite some time, bears some responsibility for the makeup of a Supreme Court that the public just doesn't trust anymore. How do we reform the judiciary?
Well, quite frankly, they need an ethics standard. This is outrageous, the most recent revelations. It is shocking to me that they do not have the basic disclosure laws and standards that are pretty common sense, and that has clearly been violated by the Supreme Court. I think Congress has the ability to respond to that. I think we should respond to it, and I know that the Judiciary Committee in the Senate is looking at that.
How do we take the partisanship, though, out of the judiciary? My thesis is the minute we lowered the threshold to 50 votes for all judges, we made those robes red and blue. They no longer are black. And you know, that to me has been the unintended consequence of, quote, getting through this process faster and all of that. How do we take the partisanship out if we don't raise the voting threshold?
Well, I think it was a major mistake to lower the threshold from 60 to 50 for the Supreme Court appointments.
Don't you think it was a mistake all over? I mean, I understand you saying that exception because it was a Democrat that lowered the threshold for the lower courts. It was a Republican that lowered the threshold for the upper court. Why has this been good for any of the courts?
Well, it's interesting. Before we lowered the threshold, it was unheard of to filibuster a Supreme Court nominee. We allowed it to have an up or down vote. As you know, Justice Thomas was confirmed with less than 60 votes. We should not be using these partisan tools to block the selection and confirmation of judicial nominees. I would just point out the way that President Trump submitted his nominees, in some cases not even allowing Democrats to interview the nominees, was outrageous. It was very partisan. It was a restricted list. I think it's not just the confirmation process in the Senate. It's the way that the Trump administration politicized the appointments to the Supreme Court to a level that we had never seen before.
I understand that, but I've talked to members of Bush's White House counsel's office who said, boy, had the threshold been 50 and not 60, it would have been an entirely different set of nominees. They would have even offered the Senate. So we really have remade the judiciary in a more political, activist way that I don't think was the intention.
I think we should be appointing judges who are not going to be with a partisan agenda, whether it's a Democrat or Republican.
But how do you do that if you have a 50-vote threshold? Don't you, I mean, isn't the irony that without the 60 votes, that is what forced, essentially compromise on this?
Chuck, I would hope that we would have leadership in the White House and the leadership in the United States Senate that recognizes this and calls a truce to these partisan nominations. No question Donald Trump took it to a new low level. We got to restore that. I think the 60-vote threshold would help, but quite frankly, I think majority rules. I think we can work on a 50-vote threshold and still be able to achieve an independent judiciary, because quite frankly, as a Democrat, I want an independent judiciary. I don't want a partisan judiciary, even if we can control those appointments.
Let me ask you about the debt ceiling. You've been through many a fiscal crisis. You're a veteran of many a fiscal crisis. I hear, and I know you and your colleagues have been talking about how ridiculous all this is, and yet we go through this process over and over, whether, arguably Democrats had control of Congress and could have changed the rules of how the debt ceiling is even dealt with, a negative resolution or something like that. Why allow this to sit out there as a tool to be weaponized?
Well, it shouldn't be a tool to be weaponized. We should take the paying of our debt and default off the table. It should not be an issue. If we approve the appropriation bills and then we incur the debt, we should pay our bills, and there shouldn't require any additional action of Congress in order for that to take place. We've made some suggestions to do that. I've been have suggested some. We should remove this altogether. We have enough leverage on each political party during the appropriation process. Use that. Don't the United States.
At this point, though, the president, should he be sitting down with Speaker McCarthy?
I think not on the budget for next year, but certainly let's get this debt issue behind us on default. It should not be. We should not use that threat, a gun at our heads, literally, on paying our bills. That we don't want to reward that, and we don't have the bill that passed the House is not a bill that even allows us any opportunity to talk in any rational way. And President Biden has already submitted his spending plan for this year, his budget. Let's sit down and talk about that, but not whether we're going to pay our bills.
Final question. Look, you're a year younger than President Biden. He's seeking re-election. You've chosen not to. There's been a lot of chatter about age limits in the federal government, whether it's Supreme Court, whether it's the Senate, considering the situation with Senator Feinstein. I'm curious, do you have a personal opinion on that? You think there should be some sort of limit?
No, I don't think there should be an age limit. I was looking at, of course, a 6-year term. President Biden's looking at a 4-year term. So it's a different length of commitment. But I think each person has to make their own judgments, and the voters should have that choice. So, no, I don't think there should be an age limit.
At the end of the day, the voters can decide whether or not you're up to the job, right?
Absolutely.
Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, been there a long time. Good to see you. I'll know I'm going to see you again before the term is over. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.